afternoon, night, whatever it is. Hello everyone. Today we are back for another video guide. In this video I will talk you through some tournament play tips I have, but this is not completely tournament oriented. This applies to any game at all, whether it's in a casual setting or in a small GNK or at the largest tournaments. There are lots of Netrunner is a game with a lot of mental load. And often you see even top level players make a lot of mistakes, missing triggers, forgetting to pay, forgetting to do certain things. And that goes to show how mentally burdening Netrunner is. And I think a lot of us, myself included, play on Jinteki.net too much and have been spoiled by the automation. So for some of you out there who may not have had as much real life Netrunner experience as me, I'm very lucky. I live in a country where there's lots and lots of tournaments on tap, so I get to practice a lot. But for some of you, that might not be the case. So this is a video and an avenue for me to share some of the tips that I've accumulated over playing in meat space for a long time, and you might be able to incorporate some of this in your gameplay as well. I've also harvested a couple of tips from courtesy of UK Slack, from other fellow players who have found certain habits to be very useful in reducing the number of careless mistakes that are not even related to gameplay, just bookkeeping and stuff. So let's get into it. The first and most important guideline I want to give is that you have to be consistent. You want to set out a plan, like where do you keep your score area? Where do you place your archives? Do you arrange R&D on your left or right of HQ? All of these are very important to keep consistent, because the best way to make mistakes is to do things differently and break routine. That way you're more likely to mess up. Whereas if you do things consistently, you can sort of autopilot even though you're tired during a tournament, and you won't make mistakes that way. So always set out, like, where do you put your credit pool, for example? Do you put it on your ID? Do you put it in front of the of your playmat? These are important considerations, but it doesn't matter which you choose. The most important thing is to pick one and keep it that way and play all your games that way. Another important key is you want, if you are in the context of a tournament, the two decks that you bring, the runner and your corp deck, you want to have some practice with it in meat space beforehand, because another big source of misplays comes from not knowing your deck very well and then missing triggers. Like if you're not used to playing with pet campaigns or say Palana foods, for example, you will always forget to trigger Palana when your opponent draws a card. Whereas if you've played it a lot in meat space, you will remember the trigger. So this is a very important point that a lot of people overlook. It's important to get practice games, at least say 5 games, ballpark number, just so that you are familiar with your deck and are familiar with the triggers that are contained in your deck. So there are some exceptions to this, of course. Consistency is important, but certain decks demand that you do some creative things. Like at Worlds, I was playing a max deck. This is max DLR, and you can clearly see my archives is very different from the traditional stacked archives that you normally see. Like usually archives look something like this, but I decided to fan everything out, and that's just the nature of max. I feel that if you're playing a max deck, you want to know what's in your bin. This is a very important thing to know, and being able to see everything at a glance, and at a glance see how many siphons you have, how many DDoSes have hit the bin, for example, is very, I found it very useful when piloting a max deck. So a lot of basic things like where do you put your agendas, where do you put your credits, these should be kept constant. But there are some exceptions, like this is one very good example. But for the most part, everything should stay consistent, like your credit pool and your agendas, where do they go? You can see in this example, I always put my agendas on my poker chip token casing. So there's no ambiguity right there. And this is something I consistently do, regardless of whether I'm playing runner or corp, regardless of the ID that I'm playing. But this is an exception rather than the norm. Let's talk about some important things to keep note of. Firstly, credit tokens. This is a very important concept, universal across every single game. You want to get it right. I don't really care whether you use unofficial tokens, official tokens or unofficial poker chips or dice, whatever. It doesn't matter. The most important thing is that they are readable to both yourself and your opponent. It's very annoying if your opponent has to keep asking you how many credits you have. And personally, I've developed a very easy system. Just stack them in 5s. not that difficult. And yeah, I highly recommend everyone to just practice with playing with only 1s and 5s. 2s and 3s can get really messy if you have a bunch of tokens lined up that go 1, 2, 2, 3, like those metal tokens, you know. They might be lined up very neatly, sure, but it's very annoying having to count them and do mental arithmetic on the go every single time. So I would much prefer 1s and 5s, just 1s and 5s. And I've noticed a lot of players doing that, which is very good. A tip I have from Cursor, from UK Slack, is that you can place drip credits on cards, as you see here, to remind yourself of the trigger. So cards like Pet Campaign and Polana Foods all fall under this category. This is very useful to help you remember that you need to trigger them. So at the start of your turn, if you have credits lying on your Pet Campaigns, take them into your pool. If your opponent draws a card, remember to transfer the poker chip into your credit area, and always refresh them at the start of your turn. This gives you a very good system to ensure that you remember your triggers, and it allows your opponent to know that, hey, this guy's not cheating. They know when their triggers are, and they are not triggering it more than once per turn. Beware of ambiguity. This can be a bit tricky. With Nasex, for example, Nasex has another ability where you can put power counters on Nasex, and if you put credits on it to remind yourself to take the drip credit, as with Pet Campaign, it could get mixed up with the power counters. So you have to be careful with these details. But for the most part, this is a pretty good system to remind you of whether you have triggered your cards this turn. Let's look at something else. On the topic of remembering triggers, I've developed another system with which to remember to make my triggers. A lot of triggers I often forget. It's very common for me to forget to take 2 credits off daily cast, and I think you can see that in some of my Worlds games as well. One thing I try to do to remember that is to arrange all the cards with the same trigger in the same area. Look at this box here. These are all start of turn triggers. At the start of my turn, I take money off daily cast, I take 2 cards from outside, and I refresh the 3 credits on Wizard. So with this systematic approach, I'm able to just go left to right and ensure that every single card with the at the start of your turn trigger gets triggered. Similarly, you can see here these are successful run triggers. And yeah, this could be, I wouldn't recommend this strategy for newbies because you could easily get your rig mixed up. For example, you can see here my cards are, to the untrained eye, it seems like my cards are all over the place. I have my resources in an L shape and my programs in another L shape, and this could be really bad for new players because one important thing to keep track of is memory, and if your programs are all over the place, you can lose track of your memory very quickly. Oh, and there's another resource here that doesn't share a trigger with any of these at all. So yes, this could look very messy, but I found that it helps me a lot with bookkeeping. If you're a more experienced player and you can try this out and let me know how you get on with it. I found this to be pretty effective in minimizing the number of missed triggers on my part. Another thing to take note of is that you want to reduce your stress. Netrunner is a very stressful game, and often you see a lot of players, especially those with Magic the Gathering backgrounds, just shuffling their cards in hand even when it's not their turn, as if they cannot sit still or something. A tip that I got from Chris, and something I follow as well, is to put your HQ or grip on the table when it's not your turn. This way you can focus more on your opponent, and you are able to reduce stress and nervousness on your end. But yeah, and I find it to be pretty helpful as well. And I do notice myself doing it in my regular games as well. One thing you want to take note of when you put your HQ or grip on the hand anytime at all is that it must remain distinct from the board. This has caused problems before. I've heard stories on UK Slack of a certain person, who I won't name, you know who you are, almost accidentally losing a game they were meant to win because they couldn't find the HQ as the corp. They were playing asset spam, and somehow or another they forgot where they put their HQ. This is something that is very inadvertent, something very subconscious. So putting your hand on the grip, putting your hand on the table, you often forget where it is because it's such a subconscious action. Be very conscious of this and develop a system, again back to my first point, a consistent system of putting your cards on the table so that you can identify them. Do not mix it up with your HQ upgrade. The worst thing you can do is when you have a HQ upgrade, putting your hand on the upgrade, and then when you go to take your hand, you accidentally take the upgrade from your HQ as well. That's a game loss. Another thing you don't want to do is to mix up with your discard pile or your remotes. So typically a very good strategy I found is to fan out your HQ when it's on the table. When you see a pile of fan cards on HQ, you can bet that this is your grip and not something that is involved in the game state. So some examples of this, you can see it in this picture here. This is a clip taken from Worlds this year and features some very ugly person here trying to get runners up, I guess. So you can see this is where the grip is placed, and you notice that it was tilted, rotated 45 degrees. So it's very, very clear that this is not part of the rest of the game state at all. So there's no confusion there, no ambiguity for the opponent, which is very important. You don't want your opponent attempting to make a run on an imaginary server. You'll see the credit pool here. This is stack of 5, and these are fanned out individual credits, so my opponent can very easily count that this is 5, 6, 7 credits. No ambiguity there. Consistent placement of the agendas as usual. Yeah, so you see a lot of these traits. Keeping a consistent board state and arranging everything in an orderly manner will definitely help you decrease the number of missed triggers and accidents that happen during the game. Let's move on to some other tips. Start and end of turn. This has become increasingly more important as more and more triggers are added to the game. I find that it's quite important to verbally announce the start and end of your turn nowadays. And I developed, as usual, a consistent way of marking this. When I'm finished with my turn, I usually say your go or yours. And when I'm supposed to start my turn, I'll ask my opponent for confirmation by saying, is it my turn to go? And this way, I can also ensure that my opponent has discarded, that they are aware that their turn has ended, so I can mandatory draw without causing any rules problems. One way to value add on this is that when you're confirming your opponent's end of turn by saying, is it my turn to go? Ask them for the hand size every single turn. This may seem redundant, but it does two things. Firstly, it keeps them it ensures that there's no illegal board state. A lot of times people forget to discard down to hand size, and this is a very good way to remind them. Secondly, this gives you the information you need if you're playing Sweep Sweep or a Flatline in your deck. This way they will this way you can get that information without revealing to your opponent that you're actually holding a Boom or a Sweep Sweep in your hand. And sometimes this can be quite important. Or you can just ask it every turn for fun, even if you're not running a Flatline deck, to make them paranoid about kill. Next level strats right there. One interesting thing that I've been doing, and a lot of people have known me for this characteristic if you have ever played against me, is that in Swiss rounds in a tournament, you are to determine the starting side randomly. Most people roll dice for this or flip a coin. For me, what I do, this is a personal habit, is to offer them both my IDs face down. They don't know which is the runner, which is the corp, but I'll ask them to pick one, and that will be my starting side. Which one will you pick? This is actually, I find it's a very, very agreeable method for two reasons. For my opponent, they will be assured that they are in control of their destiny. If they pick a card that if they pick the side they didn't desire for some reason, at least they'll be like, oh, I could have picked the other card instead. It's my fault for choosing this card. On my end, it assures myself that my opponent isn't rigging the outcome. Obviously, this is very this is a very extreme case. I don't think anyone will cheat in a tournament, not in a Netrunner tournament anyway. But in the event that someone is, at least I ensure that they can't affect the starting side by using a weighted die or something similar. It's the same concept as shuffling your opponent's deck before passing it back to them. Most opponents, if not all, will probably not be cheating. They probably won't be stacking the deck, but in the event that there is, at least there's this deterrence to ensure that they don't get the idea of cheating in a tournament. Another interesting advice I received from Alex from Slack is that you can do ice-breaking cost calculations out loud. So when you are determining how much it costs to get through a server, instead of doing mental sums, you can just calculate out loud, or even additionally, just physically move your credit tokens to the target ice, without committing them. Of course, you must announce this to your opponent, make sure they know that you are not actually spending these credits, but you are merely just calculating the cost of getting through the server. This really helps you reduce the error. The last thing you want to do is to get to the final ice and realize you're 1 credit short of making it all the way through. So this helps you a lot. Yeah, just make sure to seek your opponent's consent before doing so. The last thing you want to do is for a communication breakdown to happen and having to call a judge over. That's the last thing you want. But yes, calculating out loud or physically is often a good way to ensure that you've got your maths right. Run events are quite interesting because unlike most other events, they don't go straight to the bin after resolving them, or rather during the resolution. What I usually like to do with run events is to leave them on the table, directed at the server that I'm trying to run. This way, I can remember that I'm making a dirty laundry run or an account siphon run, and I remember to trigger the successful run on success, whatever the run event is. And this is quite important because I feel like runs are usually where the most mistakes happen. Often people lose track of their clicks or lose track of the game state when making a run, and this helps alleviate that quite a bit. One additional thing I like to do is that when I'm making a run with a run event, I like to put credit tokens on the run event as a way to signify that I've actually paid for the run event. That way I don't have to yeah, there's no ambiguity there. People won't ask me, oh, have you paid for your run event? Which is something that, believe it or not, a lot of people tend to forget. So, yeah. You will see this in a video that I'll show right here. So here's an example of how I would approach a run. For example, if I were to Dirty Laundry HQ, I'll remember to pay 2 credits by putting the credits on the run event. Then, to pay for the ice, assuming I've got them laid out, that's 1 for the quandary and 5 for the Archangel. I don't have to commit these chips, but by doing so, I can now calculate and say, hey, okay, I have enough money to do this. So I'm going to pay it, I'll remove these from the gameplay area, I'll access 1 card, and at the end, I'll put 3 credits here and take them all into my credit pool to remind me that the Dirty Laundry run has been completed and I need to get my reward for it. So with this systematic approach to paying and gaining credits, it's much less likely that you will miss triggers or mistrack your credit pool. Now earlier I mentioned about click tracking. Personally, I feel that there's no need for you to track your clicks. And if you notice in the world's videos, a lot of top players don't actually track their clicks. Simply because it's not necessary. As long as you're taking 4 click turns or less, you should be able to map out your entire turn and mentally execute your clicks without having a physical click tracker to keep track of it. If you can't keep track of even 4 clicks, you must be doing something wrong. You're not planning out your turn in advance, or you're taking too long to think of your next action. Of course, an exception to this is if you're playing against a very sloppy opponent who is taking more clicks than they should, then obviously you should start tracking them. But for the most part, click trackers are not necessary. The only time where you would possibly lose track of your clicks is, for example, if you're playing Geist and you have a lot of trash can triggers, or if you're in the middle of a run. Oftentimes I find that after completing a run, I ask myself, oh wait, which click was that? And that can be a problem. One way to solve this is to put a dice in front of the server that you're currently running. So if this is a server and there's ice in front, there's ice in front, what you can do is to put a dice in front. If it's a click to run, you put a dice with the number 2 on it and announce that you're making a run on this server. So when the run ends, you look at this dice, you take it away and say that was a click to run, I have 2 clicks left on my turn. This is a very good way to keep track of clicks without actually using click tokens, which are not necessary at all. So to summarize everything, these are the points that I've covered in this presentation. But I think the most important one to outline at the end of the day is to sadly play more. I can't stress this enough. A lot of triggers are missed simply because you're not very familiar with the deck. Or yeah, you're just not playing it systematically because it's a new deck and you're arranging your cards in any which way, shape or form. The more consistently you are able to organize your board state, the less mistakes you will make. Trust me on that. And I hope this video has been useful for you. Maybe it will improve your play. Do you have any other tips that might be useful? Share them in the comment section. I'm sure everyone would like to hear from you. And yeah, scroll down in the comment section yourself. You might hear of some interesting tips from some of my fellow viewers. So hope you have fun during your tournaments. It's never nice when you miss out on a card, or you get a game loss because of you weren't able to keep track of your board state properly. And hopefully this mitigates that for you. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and as always, happy net running. I'll see you around.